Essentially, when the brain sees something that's novel, it has to burn more energy to represent it because it wasn't expecting that. This feeling that things are going in slow motion is a trick of memory. In other words, when you're in an emergency situation, a part of the brain called the amygdala comes online. This is your emergency control center. It lays down memories on what amounts to a secondary memory track. These are very dense memories. And you're noticing everything around you and writing it all down. So when the brain reads that back out, there's such a density of memory there that the brain's only conclusion is that must have taken a long time. And I think this offers an explanation for why people think that time seems to speed up as they grow older. And it's because when you're a child, everything's new to you. You're figuring out the rules of the world, you're writing down a lot of memory, and so when you look back at the end of a year, you have a lot of memory of what you've learned. But when you're much older and you look back at the end of the year, you're probably doing approximately the same stuff you've been doing for the X number of previous years. And so it seems like the year just went by in a flash. Why do we snore? Is there a bigger issue? Well, it's quite simple really. People snore when they are having a really boring dream. Or when I'm doing my stand-up routine. See? Lights out. I'm still working on the jokes. But for real, Mayo Clinic defines snoring as the hoarse or harsh sound that occurs when air flows past relaxed tissues in your throat, causing the tissues to vibrate as you breathe. People can snore due to a variety of reasons. Allergies or a cold might do it, as well as alcohol consumption or sleep deprivation. A person's weight could also play a factor. Even just the anatomy of your mouth and sinuses could play a part. No matter the puzzle pieces that add up to a person snoring, it could be a sign of a bigger issue known as obstructive sleep apnea, or OSA. Now, not every snorer has this condition even if their snoring is chronic, but OSA can be a serious condition that should be addressed by a medical professional. The structure of a language forces us to attend to certain aspects of language, at the moment of using that language. It's known as the thinking for speaking hypothesis. There's evidence that language involves some kind of image simulation and that has a consequence for how we perceive of certain events. Color is quite a complex property of a visual world. Your brain is decoding color in quite a complicated way. So you have many languages that have a term to denote both green and blue, and typically we call this a GRU term. You find this in languages like the Himba, for example, in the Namibian plains. In this experiment, we asked participants to look at the color tile, and then after 30 seconds we show them the full array of colors and we say, "Now, pick the one that you just saw." And it's a very difficult task if you're an English speaker, but a Himba speaker can do it like child's play because that color is central to them. You simply cannot recognize colors that are not easily encoded in your native language. I want you to talk a bit about consciousness and conscious consumption because I feel that you've got a different perspective on it. Yeah, than the typical. If you go and read a business school case on conscious consumption, it's about where was the environmental footprint of this. Yeah. But you're talking about something bigger, yes, than environmental impact, which matters, but you're talking about almost something at the core. Everything we do on Earth is about creativity. And I think that we live here, and oftentimes people fall into these patterns and they end up being recyclers, if you will, of somebody else's life or a model. And that's not your mission. Your mission in life is to break the mode, and do things independently that are very unique to you, just like an artist. So my mission is to create a network, the infrastructure, if you will, the highway, if you will, to support all kinds of artists, and if these artists can all actually make a living like a thriving business, rather than be kind of a shunned career, then creativity will now be something that we, as a society, actually endorse and take pride in. Ultimately, the most important thing for learning is not the way the information is presented but what is happening inside the learner's head. People learn best when they're actively thinking about the material, solving problems, or imagining what happens if different variables change. I talked about how and why we learn best in my video, The Science of Thinking, so check that out. Now, the truth is, there are many evidence-based teaching methods that improve learning. Learning styles is just not one of them. And it is likely, given the prevalence of the learning styles misconception, that it actually makes learning worse. I mean, learning styles give teachers unnecessary things to worry about, and they make some students reluctant to engage with certain types of instruction. And all the time and money spent on learning styles and related training could be better spent on interventions that actually improve learning. You are not a visual learner, nor an auditory learner, nor a kinesthetic learner, or more accurately, you are all these kinds of learner in one. The best learning experiences are those that involve multiple different ways of understanding the same thing. And best of all, this strategy works not just for one subset of people but for everyone. Too often in marriage, we make sacrifices, and we demand them, without reckoning their cost. But there is wisdom in looking at the price tags attached to our marital decisions in just the way that divorce law teaches us to do. What I want is for people to think about their marital bargains through the lens of divorce. And to ask, how is marriage a sacrifice, but an exchange of sacrifice? How do we think about our exchange? Second, how do we think about childcare and deal with the fact that there is no such thing as free childcare? How do we deal with the fact that some things can be separate, and if we don't think about it, then it will all be part of the joint enterprise? So basically, what I want to leave you with is that in marriage or divorce, people should think about the way that till death do us part marriage is forever. Great feedback givers begin their feedback by asking a question that is short but important. It lets the brain know that feedback is actually coming. It would be something, for example, like, "Do you have 5 minutes to talk about how that last conversation went?" Or "I have some ideas for how we can improve things. Can I share them with you?" This micro yes question does two things for you. First of all, it's going to be a pacing tool. It lets the other person know that feedback is about to be given. And the second thing it does is it creates a moment of buy-in. I can say yes or no to that yes or no question. And with that, I get a feeling of autonomy. The second part of the feedback formula is going to be giving your data point. Here, you should name specifically what you saw or heard, and cut out any words that aren't objective. There's a concept we call blur words. A blur word is something that can mean different things to different people. Blur words are things that are not specific. So for example, if I say you shouldn't be so defensive or you could be more proactive. What we see great feedback givers doing differently is they'll convert their blur words into actual data points. So for example, instead of saying, "You know you aren't reliable," we would say, "You said you'd get that email to me by 11, and I still don't have it yet." Specificity is also important when it comes to positive feedback, and the reason for that is that we want to be able to specify exactly what we want the other person to increase or diminish. And if we stick with blur words, they actually won't have any clue particularly what to do going forward to keep repeating that behavior. Organizations are far more likely to keep information on that attack to themselves. Why? Because they're worried about competitive advantage, litigation, or regulation. We need to effectively democratize threat intelligence data. We need to get all of these organizations to open up and share what is in their private arsenal of information. The bad guys are moving fast. We've got to move faster. And the best way to do that is to open up and share data on what's happening. Let's think about this in the construct of security professionals. Remember, they're programmed right into their DNA to keep secrets. We've got to turn that thinking on its head. We've got to get governments, private institutions, and security companies willing to share information at speed. And here's why: because if you share the information, it's equivalent to inoculation. And if you're not sharing, you're actually part of the problem, because you're increasing the odds that other people could be impacted by the same attack techniques. Getting back to PTSD, another type of non-declarative memory is emotional memory. Now, this has a specific meaning in psychology and refers to our ability to learn about cues in our environment and their emotional and motivational significance. What do I mean by that? Well, think of a cue like the smell of baking bread, or a more abstract cue like a 20-pound note. Because these cues have been pegged with good things in the past, we like them and we approach them. Other cues, like the buzzing of a wasp, elicit very negative emotions and quite dramatic avoidance behavior in some people. Now, I hate wasps. I can tell you that fact. But what I can't give you are the non-declarative emotional memories for how I react when there's a wasp nearby. I can't give you the racing heart, the sweaty palms, that sense of rising panic. I can describe them to you, but I can't give them to you. Walls and fences are often built with the intention of security, security from another group of people from crime, from illegal trades. But walls and fences only provide us with a feeling of security, which is different from real security. Even though they might make us feel safe, the structures themselves can't protect us. Instead, they do something else. they separate. They create an us and a them. They establish an enemy. Walls make us build a second wall in our head, a mental wall. And those mental walls slowly make us lose sight of all the things we have in common with the people on the other side. The other way around, mental walls can grow so strong that they encourage us to build, keep, or strengthen physical walls. Physical and mental walls are closely interlinked, and one almost always comes with the other. It's a constant cycle. Physical walls empower mental walls, and mental walls empower physical walls until at one point one part falls away, and the cycle is disrupted. Chopsticks are used in a huge portion of the world across much of Asia. About 1.5 billion people are covered in the chopsticks sphere. Different cultures have slightly different variations of chopsticks. Chinese chopsticks will tend to be long and round, Korean chopsticks, which are flatter, and often made of metal, and Japanese chopsticks tend to be round, and very pointy. While chopsticks are actually really commonplace in American society today, there was definitely a time in the late 1800s where this idea that Asian men, because they ate rice with sticks, were of a different quality than American men who ate proper meat with knife and fork. But, when China and the United States began their diplomatic engagement in the 1970s, Richard Nixon, Henry Kissinger had to practice eating with chopsticks. What's been really interesting to see is that as Asian cuisine has moved from the East into the West, chopsticks have become part of the experience. There's evidence of chopsticks as long ago as the Shang dynasty, which was about 3,000 years ago. And they loved tripods during the Shang dynasty, so, when you cook with these big tripods, chopsticks were actually really useful because it was a way for you to stir and to reach without getting burned as the water was boiling in these really big pots. Chinese culture has knives and has forks, that uses them in many cases for cooking, but in terms of what moved into the dining room, it was the chopsticks. Small changes can add up to big shifts in the environment. We know this from decades of research on addictive substances. I understand we really would all like to believe that we're in charge, that we have complete freedom over what we eat. But how free can we be? Living in a saturated environment, one that continuously surrounds us with food products carefully engineered to get us hooked and keep us coming back for more. Those kids in the Tenderloin, they apparently live in what's called a food desert. They don't even have access to a grocery store, really. What's a grocery store when it's stuffed with junk food, 74% of it loaded with added sugar? All the health experts will tell you, shop around the perimeter of this grocery store, that way you can steer your way around all the junk that's in the middle. But how different is that from a strategy that steers children around drug dealers in the Tenderloin? We can do so much better than this. We don't have to live in an environment that is ready to get us fat, and then blames us for the health consequences in the medical bills. We don't have to sit by and watch our children suffer from diseases of adulthood. We can re-rig this environment to make it safe. It's not about personal choice anymore. It's about our public choice. Now let's turn to the second question. Could it be that these psychological consequences of poverty have implications for economic decision-making that make it hard to escape poverty? And there's two ways that you might imagine this could happen. The first is that the stress that's brought on by poverty might affect economic choices in subtle ways. And there's now evidence suggesting that when you're under stress you're much more impatient than you are when you're not stressed. And that's not a good thing if you're supposed to make long-term decisions and investments in things like healthcare and education. And so unless poverty causes stress, stress makes you impatient. And then that impatience doesn't help you to lift yourself out of poverty. But there's a second sense in which the psychological consequences of poverty might exacerbate poverty. And that is that they may simply incapacitate you. So when chronic stress turns into full-fledged clinical depression, it's very hard for people to keep earning a living. So you don't think your efforts will amount to anything. No amount of information about returns to education can convince you otherwise. It's hard for you to even get out of bed in the morning and your livelihood crumbles. So this is bad enough when you're wealthy, but it's worse when you're poor. And you don't have as much of a safety net to fall back on. So as a result of this, there's a silent epidemic of depression among the poor. And that's the problem not only for psychological well-being, but also for economic outcomes. What else can we do about noise? Well, very much like a carbon footprint, we all have a noise footprint, and there are things we can do to make that noise footprint smaller. For example, don't start mowing your lawn at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Your neighbors will thank you. Or use a rake instead of a leaf blower. In general, noise reduction at the source makes the most sense. So whenever you are looking to buy a new car, air conditioning unit, blender, you name it, make low noise a priority. Many manufacturers will list the noise levels the devices generate, and some even advertise with them. Use that information. Many people think that stronger noise regulation and enforcement are good ideas, even obvious solutions perhaps. But it's not as easy as you may think, because many of the activities that generate noise also generate revenue. Think about an airport and all the business that is associated with it. Our research tells politicians at what noise level they can expect a certain health effect, and that helps inform better noise policy. Robert Cook supposedly once said, "One day, mankind will fight noise as relentlessly as cholera and the pest." I think we are there, and I hope that we will win this fight, and when we do, we can all have a nice, quiet celebration. Fiber is amazing. It affects the digestive tract from top to bottom. It is very simply a carbohydrate the body can't absorb. While other carbs are broken down into sugars, fiber passes by sort of moseying along, doing all kinds of cool things. High fiber foods physically take longer to eat, so they help us pace our meals. The bulk also slows down digestion, especially in the stomach, and makes you feel full longer. Fiber also draws water into the stool, keeping it soft. Scratchy, hard stool is, to put it mildly, unpleasant. It also increases bacterial mass. The water and bacteria together increase the bulk of the stool, which helps it move along. Fiber also slows absorption of sugars into the bloodstream and reduces absorption of fats and cholesterols. And as fiber collects in your colon, it feeds all your good gut bacteria, helping you maintain a healthy microbiome. Fiber is associated with the reduced risk of diabetes, heart disease, several gastrointestinal conditions and even certain cancers. A person facing real dehydration won't be unsure if they need water. They'll do whatever they need to get it. It's one of our most basic instincts that's evolved over a very long time, in environments where clean water wasn't nearly as readily available as it is today. So thanks to your kidneys, your body is really good at maintaining hydration. But if you stop counting 8 glasses of water a day, how much should you be drinking? The answer is simple: there is no should. When you feel thirsty, drink some water. You can trust your body. Unless you have kidney stones or are elderly sometimes, our messaging systems get a little worn with age or your doctor has told you otherwise. Constantly monitoring how much water you drink is not really necessary. Here's a point that's often missed: every single thing you consume contains water. Your morning coffee has water, so does your breakfast. And that snack: an apple, an orange, a glass of juice, a granola bar, just like you, they're made of water too. So as long as you're listening to your body's internal sense of thirst, there's really no need to be counting those 8 glasses. The sleep-associated consequences are more significant than you may realize. For example, in the spring, when we lose 1 hour of sleep, there is a subsequent 24% relative increase in heart attacks. In contrast, in the fall, in the autumn, when we gain an hour of sleep, there is a 21% reduction in heart attacks. Isn't that incredible? I should also note that we see similar changes in things, such as road traffic accidents, strokes, and tragically, suicide rates as well. In fact, even the economy suffers with certain stock market returns, taking a downswing following the shift to daylight saving time and that 1 hour of lost sleep. This is how fragile our brains, our bodies, and even our societies are, when it comes to sleep loss. But said more positively, even just small increases in sleep can have immediate as well as long-term health benefits. So rather than thinking of sleep as a cost, we can instead think of sleep as one of the very best investments we can make. Motto: we are currently living in a society that is so focused on outwards aesthetics. So I think there is also a driving need for people more interested in things like laser surgery or injectables like Botox or filler from a much younger age than we've seen before. Narrator: so despite the lure of magical remedies and luxurious concoctions, avoiding skin damage and combating the signs of aging don't need to be so expensive. Motto: budget products can be equally as effective as their more expensive counterparts. The focus shouldn't be on the cost of the product. Wearing a good quality sunscreen, SPF minimum 30, ideally 50, throughout the year. The reason for that is that 80% to 90% of the signs that we associate with skin aging occur directly because of sunlight. So we're talking fine lines, wrinkles, pigmentation. Number 2 is the use of a vitamin A-based product or a retinoid. One doesn't need to spend a fortune, and, probably, once you're spending beyond more than 25–30 pounds on a product, it's probably unnecessary. Joe has written a book called The Experience Economy. Well, what's happened is we've gone from an agrarian economy based off commodities through an industrial economy based off goods, through a service economy. And today we're in an experience economy. What experiences really do is that they engage everyone inside of them. Living in the digital age that we are now, there's more need than ever for people to connect. And the digital age also means we can document these experiences. And of course show them off online. We take selfies not because we think we're going to get the perfect picture, but because we were there and it proves that we were there. These are similar to that souvenir that you picked up on your seaside holiday that means absolutely nothing to anybody else but is so important to you. In 1947, Air copywriter Francis Geraghty came up with the slogan "A diamond is forever" and the association with eternal love was solidified. It's appeared in every De Beers advert since 1948. It's been heralded as the advertising slogan of the century. It was so successful Geraghty worked on every De Beers campaign until 1970. Shortly after it was immortalized in the Bond film of the same name. What the slogan did was create the concept that a diamond ring would be kept by the betrothed for eternity, creating a special sentiment but also meaning fewer would be resold, therefore increasing the chance for De Beers to sell more, freshly mined stones. Air's copywriters were also skilled in directing consumer spending habits, suggesting a month's salary was a good amount to spend on a ring, then upping it to 2 by the 1980s. Before the Second World War, 10% of engagement rings contained diamonds. By the 1980s the number was up to 80%. Over the same period, diamond sales in the United States grew from $23 million to $2.1 billion. De Beers and N.W. Air & Sons' marketing masterpiece played on our emotions so powerfully that not only were they able to sell us a product we didn't need, but they influenced the culture of marriage.